Hi, how are you?
I'm good, and yourself?
I am wonderful. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me today about your story and to allow other people to hear your story. I am with Minister Travielle Pope, and I just want to ask you, Travielle, if you could just introduce yourself, how you came to be behind bars, and why you're sitting here with us today.
Hey, how you guys doing? My name is Travielle Pope. My 18 years old, my senior high school, I was arrested for murder. At 19 years old, I was rightfully convicted, and I was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. In my 25th year of incarceration, Governor Brown commuted my sentence to life without from life without the possibility of parole to 25 years of life, making me eligible to go to the parole board. May 18th, 2018, I walked out of prison after 26 years of incarceration.
And this is an amazing story because I initially met Travielle behind bars, and he had life without the possibility of parole, which means that there was supposed to be no parole board. There wasn't supposed to be any of that happening. He had a toe tag parole, as they call it.
Yeah.
And so, tell me, behind bars, because you're behind bars 26 years, you didn't have any idea that you would ever have an opportunity to get out. And what was the change that transpired in your life, where and what are some of the things that you did in character development leading up to where you were considered for to be pardoned by Governor Brown?
That's a great question. Do you have the time for me to give you the answer? Uh,
Yes.
uh,
We gotta make the time.
yeah, there was a lot of things. M- my first 5 years of incarceration, I received over 22 write-ups for violent and aggressive behavior. And I think I just got to the point that I just grew up. You know, I was behind bars, I was in prison, I grew up. The same things that I was doing in prison were the same things that led me to prison. And I decided that I wanted change. So subsequently in 2000, uh, October 9th, I believe it was, 2000, I accept Christ as my personal Lord and Savior. When you talk about what did I do to get to that point, there's a lot of things I did. I took a lot of self-help classes. I was in a dog program, but I think that all of those things helped, but they didn't sustain me. You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, I learned what real rehabilitation was. I learned what true empathy and true sympathy. I learned all of those things through the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible is what taught me rehabilitation. And it was the Bible that put me in the place where I can be even considered to have my sentence commuted. So, you know, it was nothing that I did. It's all by the grace of God. It's what God did. God did it. I was
Mm-hmm.
just I was just a willing vessel. I just said yes, and God did the rest.
So you were taking a lot of programs in the prison, as well as you changed your life around because you had a personal relationship with the Lord that began to develop that supported even the programming. So you mentioned the dog program. That is the program where you train dogs inside while you're inside the prison to be support animals. Is that correct?
Yes. It started out as basic obedience training.
Mm-hmm.
Sit down, stay calm, and you deal with the various behaviors um with the dogs. And then it expanded into service dog. However, I didn't expand to the service side part of it. I just stayed on the training of the basic obedience.
Mm-hmm.
And I elevated in that program and I actually became the training coordinator before I came home. So I just enjoyed, the early stages of training the dog, bonding with the dog. Some dogs came in hurt, abused. We got the opportunity to nurse them back to life, and that's the side that I enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And at what point, when during your incarceration, did you, because there are some things that you and I also I interviewed D'Angelo McVeigh as well. Uh, you're a great friend, and you guys were a great support to one another. What are some of the things that you were able to do inside the prison? Now, you still don't know that you're going to be considered for commutation at all. So there are some things that you and D'Angelo did inside the prison in terms of developing. And why did you make the decision to do those things?
Well, first off, my mom, she always instilled in me and my sister that whatever state we may find ourselves in, to make the best of it and become the best individuals wherever we find ourselves as we possibly can be. So I had my mom in the back of my head ringing, Travielle, you can be better. Travielle, you're better than this. But then also too, I didn't want to be one of those Christians in prison that I had my Bible, you know what I mean? And I was involved in the prison politics. I was involved in everything. I wanted to live for the Lord. And so in doing that, I went to school, enrolled in seminary while I was incarcerated, and earned all the way up to a master's degree in ministry. Um, I got certification as a biblical counselor, and through that, I had the opportunity to minister to a plethora of men. I had an opportunity to minister to officers, up the chain, as high as associate warden. I had an opportunity, and that's rare. That you can go on the officer side and be able to minister effectively. So there was a lot of things that was able to do. Became mentors to the youth that come into prison at a young age. Because why? I was once there. I was 19 years old when I entered prison. So I understood the snares and the traps and the pitfalls. I understood the fears that they may have, coming into prison. And it was by the grace of God that I was able to walk alongside of some of those individuals and help them to successfully adjust, integrate into prison. Because when you come into prison, it's one of two things. Either you're gonna learn how to do the time, or the time is gonna do you. And that's when we see our suicides, and that's when we see drug abuse. That's when we see people developing mental conditions and things like that. So, I had a great opportunity to basically, in a nutshell, I had a great opportunity to be a difference maker. Had
Mhm.
opportunity to stop riots on the
Yeah.
yard between Black and Latinos. You know, I can't even count how many conflicts, by the grace of God, that He put me in the position where I can be the voice of reason to stop men from getting hurt, to stop officers from getting hurt. So, when you asked me earlier, I said, dude, you really have the time, because when in the Bible, when it says that basically that it wasn't enough paper to write down everything that Jesus did.
Yeah. Yeah.
It might not be enough time in this interview to really like go into everything, because you know it's all to the glory of God. You know what I mean? It's all to the glory of God.
So let me ask you this, because since you weren't looking at parole at a particular point and you're developing and you're growing, you earn your master's degree, you're ministering inside the prison. Did you just make up your mind that my ministry starts here and now, and you're going to be the best that you can be regardless of the outcome?
Yes. Well, the Bible says that we are uh trees of righteousness, and we're planted by the Lord. So I made up in my mind that the tree can't tell the planter where to plant it at. So
Mhm.
wherever the tree is planted, you have to trust that in our case, God is our planter. So you have to understand that God is going to put us in a place where even when it look like there isn't any water, there's going to be water to sustain us. Where it look like it might not be no sun, He's going to put us in a place, and He is that water. He is the sun. He is it all. And so that was where He placed me. And so I made up in my mind. And my mom always used to tell me this. My mom was one of my great. You'll hear me talk about my mom and my wife all the time. My mom and my wife were two of my greatest encouragers. My mom used to tell me, Travielle, you have a prison ministry. God has called you there to minister. You know, everybody can't live there and minister, but God has called you to it. And you know, my wife always used to tell me, Travielle, God is not gonna put nothing on you that you can't bear. You can do it. He has equipped you to do it. And you do, my wife always tell me, if you do what God says to do, then God will open the doors. But you have to be obedient first. And so I had these two women tag teaming me in my mind, and I just made in my mind that I just wanted to be obedient to the Lord. You
Mm,
planted me here, you know, and I made up in my mind that come hell or high water, whether I be set free or not, that I was going to live for the Lord, and I was going to be the best Christian that I possibly can be, because I know that when the gates of hell come up against me. You know, the Bible says that when the waters come in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord shall lift up a standard. And so I just put my trust in God, and I said, you know what, Lord, if you set me free, that's fine. But if you don't set me free, that's fine too, because wherever I'm at, I know you're there, and I'm not serving you for a release date. I'm serving you because you're God. And if I was serving him for a release date, Cam, let's just say I was in prison 18 more years after I gave my life to Christ. So if I was serving for a release date, maybe 5 years in, well, if not five, then let's just say 10. No,
yeah,
not 10, 18. You know, at some point, if it was for a release date, I would have quit a long time ago.
yeah, yeah. Now I've had people tell me that prison saved their life. How do you feel about that?
Oh, I'm like, David, it's good that I'm afflicted, that I might learn thy statutes. You know, prison was real good. Prison did preserve my life. And not only did, and I'm gonna be bold if I may, not only did prison save my life, prison saved the life of others, because I was on a downward spiral, and I was sinking deep in sin. And
Mm-hmm,
I know that if I wouldn't have went to jail, I would have continued to live the lifestyle that I was living, and there's a great possibility that it would have resulted in more loss of life.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You know what I mean, and
Yeah,
include maybe mine. So you know, I'm thankful. Prison saved my life, and it saved other lives as well.
that's amazing. Now let me ask you, I'm gonna just shift a little bit. How did you did it make a difference for you when people would come from the outside to come in and volunteer their time to come inside the prison? Because there are people who work at the prison that conduct classes, and then you have inmate led classes, but then you have volunteers who come from the outside and avail their time to facilitate courses, which is what I did. That's what my organization does. Did it make a difference for you? And if so, how?
First, let me say this: am I not on the Zoom with you?
Right.
'Cause I met you in prison,
Yeah.
and so, and then when I came home, the first time I went to church, where did I see you at?
Church.
You understand?
On the overhead screen.
So what I'm saying is, it's a great impact. You know, it goes to when Jesus in Matthew 25, when Jesus was talking to his disciples and he told them, you know, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was sick, you and in prison, you visited me. They said, well, when did we do this? He said, if you did it for any one of these, you did it unto me. You know, when people come into prison, to me, that's like I'm getting a visit from the Lord himself,
Mm,
because they're they are fulfilling a commission. You
yeah.
know what I mean? And
Hmm.
so that means all the world, and I cannot just say for me, but that means all the world for a lot of brothers that are and sisters that are incarcerated. Because one of the biggest questions as being a leader in the church, one of the biggest questions that I used to get from the brothers was, do the churches out there on the streets care about us? Do the churches on the streets, do they know that we are here? You know, and I couldn't give an answer.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and I'll be like, well, we gotta pray, you know, and we have to remember that I believe that the writer of Hebrews is Paul. The writer said that do not forget the prisoner as in chains. Some say translations say as in bonds, and some translations say as in chains with them, right?
Hmm.
So there,
Hmm.
the Bible tells us to not forget the prisoner. So for me, it's a great joy, for me, that when people came in, it made a great difference in my life. It made a great difference in my walk. It impacted me. I call people that come into the prison, I call them jailhouse Jesus with a little J.
Hmm. Yes. And just to talk about the story of it, just to tell you how God does things. The last time I saw you before you got out, I had no idea you were getting out because you had what? A life without a possibility of parole. And that meant that there was no even opportunity to go to a parole board or that was a done deal. So to say the first church upon getting out, you and D'Angelo, I think you were out less than a week.
Yeah.
Um, and it was the first church the first church you visited?
Yes.
Of all the churches in the city of Los Angeles, they visited the church that I attended. And Travielle saw me on the screen when you have the big screens and the camera pans the congregants, and he saw me. And he saw me, and he approached me after the service saying that he just got out. First of all, I didn't recognize him right away because he had on street clothes. He didn't have on the prison blues. It wasn't any of that. And he looked familiar, but there was no way I was making a connection that he was ever getting out. So I'm like, I should know you. And you're like, it's Travielle. And then I saw you have a birthmark on your face. And I said, what?
Like you saw a ghost.
And you like, and guess what? And D'Angelo's outside. Two of you that had life without the possibility of parole were standing at my church.
Hmm.
And just amazing, just an amazing shift when and then that's when I found out about that your sentence is being commuted and you had done so much great work behind bars and your motive was right for doing it because you didn't do it to get out because that was not happening.
Amen.
So so your motive was right. So by the time you were recommended for your sentences to be commuted, your names had already been across Governor Brown's desk even before that on more than one occasion. Is that correct?
You know, it was a guy, he was a brother in the Lord. His name was Craig Coley. And I think it was in 2017, he was fully exonerated after serving 41 years in prison.
Mm,
Um, Governor Brown had invited him to his office. And this is the story that he told me later. He said Governor Brown asked him, "Do you know anybody that's in prison that's rehabilitated?" And he said, "Yeah, I know a few fellas." And he said, "What's their name?" He asked me for some names. And he said one name is Travielle Craig, and another one name is D'Angelo McVeigh. He said Governor Brown looked at him and says, "I know who they are." You know,
mm,
so to answer your question, this is a story that was relayed to me, later on. This is after we got out of prison, and I think I might have been out of prison over a year
mm-hmm.
before he ever even told me that story. And I was like, "Wow, for real?" He was like, "Yeah." He says, "Governor Brown knew exactly who you guys were."
Yeah. Yeah. And that goes to show just the character that you and D'Angelo displayed behind bars and the work that you did without motive of trying to finagle your way out of prison. You really committed your lives to serve the men in that prison so that they would receive ministry, so that they would receive mentorship, and they could be developed because everybody was not serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. There were men who were coming in there that were going to be released when their sentences were up back out into society. And
Mm.
I would like to say that you both contributed to the character development, to the maturing of many of those men because you had an opportunity to be before them. And so, how would you agree with that?
I'll tell you a quick story if I may.
Yeah.
It was a couple individuals that came back and they went to the parole board, and while they were in the parole board, they was telling the parole board commissioners how that we was mentoring them and this and that. So what you're saying is true. It is, you know what I mean? That we, by the grace of God, we really had an opportunity to impact a lot of individual lives.
Yeah, and the other thing that I have found, and you could speak to this as well, when we go inside the prison to facilitate course work, I send volunteers in, and the men and the women who take those classes, when they program on a regular basis, when I say program, I mean taking, the courses that are made available to them by the prison, either the state or the federal prison. The men and the women in those courses actually have the ability in their leadership to change the culture of a yard. And so that there's less violations on the yard because the people who are developing and they're growing, they make a difference and they create a shift in the environment. Would you agree with that?
Oh, most definitely so. You've been on A Yard quite a few times.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk to being on A Yard, I would say maybe 70 to 75% of the men on the yard, excuse me, would tell you that they were Christians. And, A Yard at that time was one of the most peaceful yards
Mm-hmm.
that you in all of CDC. Why? Because it was dominated and led by Christian men, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and so yeah, when you have a group of men that make up their mind that they're gonna live, it changes the culture. All you need is one or two,
Yeah.
and then when you get those one or two, then three or four will follow. And when you get those three or four, then here comes some more, And but it all starts with one or two.
Yeah. I don't know if they still call it that. I know we used to call the A yard the honor yard.
Yeah, they call it the progressive programming facility now.
Oh, it's got a fancy name. But the honor yard, we used to call it that because the men that were on that yard, I think even to be considered for that particular yard, you had to be free of violation, I think for 5 years.
Yes.
Okay. And with how what was the stretch? Because I think you had a great number. What was the stretch for the time that you were behind bars that you had zero violations?
18 years.
I don't know how you did that.
You know how I did that?
Mhm.
I practiced my faith. I lived the tenets of my faith.
Mhm.
And we took a class called Reformers Unanimous. And it's a biblically based addictions class.
Mhm.
And it's based upon 10 principles. And the first principle is one of the principles that right now today I still try to model my life. And that principle says this. It says, if God is against it, then so am I.
Mm.
And so that's the way that I live my life. That if God is against it, so am I. I didn't try to control what the next person did because I was not responsible for them.
Mhm. Mhm.
I was only responsible for myself. I only
Yeah.
had to give an account for myself. So
Mhm.
I said, you know what, Travielle? If God is against it, so am I. I said God is against cell phones because it's against CDC rules. Then
Yeah.
so am I.
Mhm.
God is against alcohol and God is against drugs. So am I. I didn't mess with none of that stuff, and I just made up in my mind that I was gonna live for him.
So 26 years in a maximum security prison, level 4 prison. The last 18 of those years, you had no violations.
None whatsoever.
And I want to commend you for that
Thank you.
because it's not easy to go violation free in prison. I don't want to make light of that either. It's not a cakewalk. It obviously takes a made up mind, but you don't have to be doing a lot of stuff. It's the grace of God because you could be minding your own business and something happened and you have to defend yourself if the fight is broken out or something happens around you or something happens and then you end up swept up and caught up. It could happen,
And,
but that didn't happen for you.
it did happen.
Okay.
um, but it was favor
Yeah.
because I actually I actually had a fight one
Okay.
time. A
Uh-huh.
guy a guy assaulted me, and I had to defend get
Yeah.
him up off of me, right?
Yeah.
And the sergeant, she caught us,
Mhm.
and so this was a Friday. She was off on the weekend, so when she came back to work that Monday, I asked her. I said, "Are you going to write me up?" And she said, "I don't know." And I asked her a couple days later. I said, "You going to write me up?" And she looked at me and she said, I knew you when you was a knucklehead and you was around here causing havoc." She says, "Promise me one thing." I said, "What's that?" She said, "No, make it two." I said, "What's that?" She said, "Promise me that you won't stab that fella." I
Mhm.
said, "I promise you I won't." And she says, "Promise me that this situation is over." I said, "I promise you that it's over." She says, "Okay, you're trying to change your life. I'm not going to write you up." That was the favor of God.
It is the favor of God. And what I want to say, because the reason that that was such a deal is because of the culture of prison in having to avenge yourself with
Yes,
people who are watching, so that, in the natural, you don't become a target because you didn't take action against someone who assaulted you. Is that correct?
exactly.
So you basically had to believe God to squash it and that it be squashed.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So, what I want to say, what would you want people to know about the being incarcerated and just wanting to support, encouraging people to support going behind bars themselves, or if they don't feel called to go, because I do feel that it is a calling. I feel it's a calling to go. It's a thing where I've never met anybody in between. Either you love going inside the prison to be of service, or it's just not for you. I've never met the person who could just take or leave it. And it's one of those things that God has really equipped me to do. I can go into a room of men and women, and for whatever the reason, I could see them and not see what they did. And that's the God honest truth. I really can. So I can deal with them as a human being, as a person. What would you say to someone to encourage either going in themselves or financially supporting people who go inside in terms of the effort?
But I always tell people this. I always tell people that for one, churches should be prison friendly, because when you don't see the value of prison ministry, what you're doing is you're putting God in a box, and you're saying that God can operate anywhere but inside of an institution. And I'm living proof, and there's countless others, that God is at work inside of these institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very important for men and women that are incarcerated to see faces from the outside, because it gives them somebody to connect to, so that when they do have an opportunity to come home, there's a connection there.
Mm-hmm.
I connected with you in prison, and 5 years later, we still have a connection. Do we talk every day? No, we don't talk every day, but you would call, "Hey, Travielle, can you help me with this?" Or, "Travielle, can you?" No problem. There's a connection there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it all started. Think about it. If you never came into prison, I would never be on this Zoom.
Yeah.
You,
Yeah.
you understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so I understand that everybody um is not into going inside of an institution, everybody, but we have to support the ministry.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible says that God in Deuteronomy 18:18, it says this. It says, God is the one that give us power to get wealth,
Mm-hmm.
so that his covenant may be established.
Mm-hmm.
How can do God need our money to establish this covenant?
Right. Right.
No, he don't need our money to establish his covenant. But do your ministry need the money to go to travel and to go into the places?
Yeah.
Yes, gas is real. Food is real. Those prices are real.
Yeah.
You
Sound
know what I mean?
systems, everything else. Yeah.
Exactly. So, we do, and that's why it's important for us to support. I call missionaries,
Hmm.
because in the prisons is your mission field. So it's important for us as a church. It's important for us as a body to say, you know what, I might not be the one that go in and minister, but look what my $5 can do. You
Hmm.
know, and then too, we have to understand that when you do go into the prison and that man give his life to the Lord, or that woman give his life to the Lord, you are part of that as well. You get a reward for that too. Why? Because your donated dollars help contribute to this person being saved.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we have to understand that it's important. Ministry and offerings go hand in hand, because if not, man can't be always be as effective in ministry as they may want to be.
Yeah.
I want to encourage that pastors, lay people, everybody, that you would get involved with the move that's going on behind the wall. God is really doing something. There's a really
Yeah.
revival going on in the
Absolutely.
institutions. And lastly, I'll say this, that people have to understand that we want different coming out of prison. And I'm talking about us as the prisoner and our communities. And when people go through faith based rehabilitation, that has the lowest faith based rehabilitation, has the lowest percentage of people that reoffend.
So the
So
recidivism rate goes down.
exactly, the recidivism rate goes down, and the recidivism basically means those that are returning, that was incarcerated, that return back, reoffend, and turn back and return back to prison. But faith-based rehabilitation has the lowest recidivism rate out of any type of rehabilitative program.
Hmm.
And if that's not enough to make you say glory to God, then you must be spiritually dead.
Right. And just tell us what it's been like since you've been out. How long have you been out? What have you been doing? Are you working? What's going on with you now?
Um, May 18th will be 5 years that I've been home. I'm working. I work at Unite the People law firm. It's a nonprofit law firm, and it specializes in post conviction work.
Hmm.
It was our founder and CEO. Him and his brother started. His name is Caesar McDowell. He started this organization while he was incarcerated, doing 3 life sentences.
Mm.
As far as the ministry goes, I've been blessed to be able to go out on the road with Second Chance Prison Ministry. Brother, his name is CJ Orndorff, and he's partnered with TBN
Mhm.
Second Chance Ministry. So, what last month I just came back from a tour with him. We went to Louisiana, we went to Houston, and we went to Mississippi, going into the institutions, ministering to the men and women in the institutions.
Mhm.
I just been trying, just trying to stay busy, for the Lord,
Yeah.
uh, just trying to stay busy.
Yeah. And Travielle's a married man. And how many years have you been married?
Oh, me and my wife, we got 11 years married. This year be 12 years, but
Wow.
me and my wife, actually, she was with me for 18 years while I was incarcerated. So me and my wife is actually going on, wow, we're going on 23 years that we've
That
been together.
it's amazing. It's amazing. And I want to just encourage people to either get involved with the things that are going on with the organization here going inside the prison or through donation. And I want to thank you. I want to thank you. You're very special to me. You know that. You know, you and D'Angelo have a special place in my heart always. And I really admire you. I think you both are great leaders. You're great leaders. You're great men of God. And I'm just so proud of you. I really am.
Thank, thank you.
Yes. So thank you so much for taking your time to speak with us and to tell us your story and just to give us your feedback.
You're welcome. Anything for you, sister.
Thank you so much. And you have a blessed day.
You too.